Okay, so how's the day going? No. Yes! I'm gonna repeat it again. How is the day going? Green the ball! Great, wake up. Okay, so we're gonna be continuing with the session Ensuring Inclusivity in Study Design and Ethics Perspective. My colleague Irene García García, she is clinical pharmacologist at the Hospital Universitario La Paz, associate professor at Universidad Autónoma de Madrid.
Is this working? Okay, thank you, Paloma. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today. As Paloma said, I'm a clinical pharmacologist, and I'm also part of the ethics committee at Hospital La Paz. And today I'm going to talk about the role of ethics committees in promoting inclusivity in clinical trials. So in clinical research, identifying whether, when, and how a study has been designed to ensure an inclusive approach is usually a challenge, and this raises a key question. Who is responsible for ensuring that study designs are inclusive? It's a crucial question, but it's not an easy one to answer. The truth is that there are many different stakeholders involved throughout the research process, and each carries different responsibilities. But there is a common point of convergence across most countries and in the majority of studies, and that is the requirement for review and approval by research ethics committees, also known as institutional review boards. And this brings us to the next question. What role do these committees play in promoting inclusivity in clinical research? So to begin, let's take a moment to look at what research ethics committees actually are. An ethics committee is an independent body established in accordance with national law that is responsible for reviewing and providing opinion on both the ethical and the scientific aspects of clinical trials. These committees are expected to take into account the views of lay people, especially patients or patient organizations, and they should ensure that trials are conducted in line with ethical principles and applicable regulations. So according to the European regulation, before a clinical trial can begin, it must receive a favorable opinion from an ethics committee as part of the authorization process. So what's the purpose of these committees? They are responsible for protecting the rights, safety, and well-being of trial participants with special attention to vulnerable populations, and their work is guided by fundamental ethical principles: justice, beneficence, non-maleficence, and respect for autonomy. So in practice, this involves reviewing different key study documents, including the protocol, any amendments, of course, informed consent, investigators' brochure, recruitment materials and compensation plans, and they also review the qualifications of the investigators involved. All these documents are reviewed with a focus on some critical aspects, including the overall risk-benefit balance of the study, scientific and methodological soundness of the protocol, how participants will be recruited in the study, data protection requirements, of course, again, the format and content of the informed consent, how any potential harm will be compensated, and also other aspects of a regulatory nature at a national level. After reviewing all these documents, the committee can issue one of these decisions: favorable opinion when the protocol and the trial can go ahead as planned, favorable opinion with conditions when the protocol can move forward, but after certain clarifications or changes are made, and unfavorable opinion when the trial in its current form is not ethically acceptable and it cannot proceed. So now that we've seen what these committees are and what they do, you might be wondering, okay, but is promoting inclusivity really part of their job? And the truth is that yes, ethics committees are not only empowered, but they are actively encouraged under different European frameworks to promote equity, inclusion, and fairness in research design. There are different research ethical documents that highlight the importance of inclusion in research, from the European Code of Conduct for Research and Integrity to the latest update of the Declaration of Helsinki that reinforces the obligations to consider the needs and vulnerabilities of specific groups in research. But most importantly, the work of these committees is guided by core ethical principles. And when it comes to promoting inclusivity, there's one principle that stands out, and that is justice. Justice in research means that no population should be systematically excluded without a strong justification, and that the risks and benefits of research should be distributed fairly and equitably across different groups. So inclusion, it's an ethical obligation, and it should be integrated into ethical review as a practical responsibility and not just as an aspirational goal. All right, so inclusivity has to be part of the ethical review process, but how can these committees actually do that? How can they contribute to ensuring inclusivity in study design? Well, they have the authority to issue opinions and make recommendations, and that gives them real influence. So throughout the review process, they should raise questions to make sure that inclusion is not just stated in the protocol, but actually real, implemented, and verifiable. For instance, when it comes to inclusion and inclusion criteria, there are a few key questions that ethics committees should always raise. First one, do the proposed study population actually reflect those affected by the condition being studied? That's essential for both fairness and scientific validity. Next, are criteria overly restrictive? Do they exclude key populations? Sometimes in studies, unintentionally, they exclude certain groups like non-native speakers or people with disabilities, pregnant women, even when there is no strong justification for doing so. So in the end, these committees should ensure that those criteria have a clear scientific reason and that they're also ethically fair. Recruitment strategies should also be considered. Ethics committees need to review carefully whether the proposed approaches are truly inclusive and whether they are adapted to include underserved and underrepresented groups. For example, do the plans include outreach through community organizations or satellite sites, as this kind of outreach can help avoid leaving out communities that usually don't have access to research. Another key point is participant-facing materials. Ethics committees need to check whether these materials were translated into relevant languages, whether the consent process is understandable, are they using plain language, are they using visuals, are they they're using formats that are culturally appropriate, and also, important, do these materials address the needs of people with low health literacy or with cognitive challenges? It's through questions like this that they can help ensure that recruitment is not just efficient, but is also equitable and inclusive. Another important factor that impacts equity in clinical trials is accessibility and patient burden. That means the effort required to actually take part in a study, and it's something that ethics committees should also consider. For example, could decentralized tools help telemedicine or home visits? Are clinical hours and travel demands reasonable? Are visit schedules flexible enough? This all might seem like logistic details, but they can actually make the difference between who can participate and who is left out. And they should also consider patient input into study design because it helps improve recruitment, adherence, and also the relevance of the results for those actually living with that condition, and is something that's increasingly recognized as good ethical and scientific practice. But in promoting inclusivity, there are also some challenges we need to consider, starting with the fact that what's legally acceptable isn't always what's ethically appropriate. In addition, including diverse groups can add complexity, but the answer isn't exclusion, it's better study design. And we need to avoid tokenism. Inclusion has to be meaningful and not just symbolic. Another challenge is finding the right balance between inclusion, safety, and protection from exploitation. Of course, safety is always a priority, but it should not be used automatically to exclude populations like older adults or people with comorbidities. And at the same time, involving underserved or vulnerable groups requires care to ensure that participation is truly voluntarily, well-informed, and respectful. Because in the end, ethical inclusions means both protecting participants, protecting safety, but also ensuring that no one is left out unfairly. However, despite everything we've mentioned, the truth is that inclusivity still isn't consistently evaluated by many research ethics committees. They often focus on traditional aspects like informed consent or risk-benefit assessments, and questions about inclusivity and equity are frequently overlooked, and that's something that needs to be changed. So to support research ethics committees in reviewing protocols with inclusivity in mind, there are a few things that could help. First, promote diversity within committees and involve community advisors when necessary. They could also use some tools like checklists or templates to assess diversity and inclusion consistently. Some committees could also appoint inclusion champions to focus on equity during protocol review, and just as important, regular training on bias and inclusive practices is something that could help include inclusion as a standard part of the ethical review. And to close, some takeaways to keep in mind. Inclusion is not an option. Inclusivity is a core ethical responsibility. Research ethics committees can drive a real change, but to do that, they need the right tools, they need diverse voices, and they need a real and a clear commitment to inclusion. That was all. Thanks for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Irene Francis Shealy from Ireland. You're certainly speaking our language. That is definitely how things should be done. I'm curious about the implementation of what you have proposed. I've sat on 2 different ethics committees, and I can absolutely say none of that happens. The focus being the legal, there's usually a legal representative sort of has the sway in what happens or what doesn't happen. As well, personally speaking, unblinded reviews as well. So, influential PIs or people with so-called big names can influence the outcome at an ethics committee. So I suppose I'm wondering about are we missing something in terms of training for ethics committees, or I don't know what it's like in other countries across the EU. My experience is that there's some very inexperienced people on the committees and just unsure of their role, and that it affects the outcome of what's approved. So I'm just wondering about the implementation of it going forward. Thanks.
Thank you. I totally agree. This is something that is not implemented in my experience. Most committees don't really look at these important points. And I think one of the reasons is lack of training. They are not trained in these aspects. Another reason is that sometimes we believe that inclusion should be promoted by the sponsor of or investigators, but it's actually that ethics committees should review too. But to do that, as I mentioned, they need to be trained in these aspects, because in Spain, ethics committees need to have between their members lay people, but that's not enough. I mean, the reviewers need to also have some training on bias and inclusivity in order to be able to do a proper review of the documents to see that they fulfill all these criteria regarding diversity and inclusion. Yeah.
In Oman, in Germany, one important aspect could be to cover this information in the study protocol. Because the ethics committee is not a specialist usually in such a protocol, and there should be a kind of guidance in the protocol to collect material about inclusivity and the conclusions to be drawn out of that. Then it would be easier for the ethics committee to decide. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I actually sometimes protocol state some things related to diversity, but the problem is also that later on, as the ethics committee monitor the progress of the different trials, diversity is not something that they monitor. Sponsors need to provide an annual report of the progress of the trials, but the characteristics of the population included is something that committees don't usually look at closely, so that's also a problem. I agree that demanding to have that information in the protocol is important, but also review if they eventually do that is also important.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, brilliant. And yeah, completely agree with what you say, but just to refer back to the comment earlier, I've sat on some ethical review boards and absolutely dreadful. I think it goes back to what I was saying before, that if you have a senior leader or an opinion leader, what they say sways. And I think we do need much more training, but I also think that lay members need training as well, in order to sit equally at the table, in order to be able to sort of speak with credibility, and in order to act as a critical friend. And I think that that's also something that needs to be offered as well, just to sort of help their journey, and to actually sort of dig their heels in when needs be. So thank you.
I don't know the Declaration of Helsinki by heart. I should, but I don't think there is any specific provision on inclusiveness in clinical trials, and I think this could be, for instance, one of the action of the READY project to discuss with the World Medical Association, who is in charge of drafting and revising the Declaration of Helsinki, to include some provision on inclusiveness.
Yeah, well, the latest update, they say something about promoting, not inclusivity, I can't remember exactly what they say, but I like to think that they are trying to say that we should include diverse population in clinical trials, but it's true that they don't, they are not very specific about that, yeah.
Already mentioned this during your presentation. I'm a trial coordinator from Ireland. Just how does the ethics committee, how do they assess the risk-benefit balance for specific populations, and how does this go on to influence recruitment strategies?
Well, this is a question that is not easy to answer, but usually in ethics committees there are different specialists, and when you are evaluating a certain trial in a certain disease, the specialist knows how patients are treated, and the groups that are affected by that condition. As I mentioned, diversity and inclusion is now something that they don't really look at. They look at things like is the comparator adequate? Is the populations treated ethically, even if they are, can they receive placebo? Is susceptible to receive placebo? It's things like that that they review. Also, inclusion and inclusion criteria. Are participants with certain conditions that could be at risk if they receive that specific treatment excluded. It's things like that, what they review right now. That's what they do. But not so much things related to specific groups and risk benefit in specific populations. I don't know if I answered your question.